Naomi never imagined that 3 letters could dismantle her entire sense of self, but the moment the genetic counselor quietly slid the folder across the table and said BRCA positive, something inside her cracked in a way that felt both invisible and catastrophic, because this wasn't just a medical result, it was a sentence handed down by history, blood, and inevitability. A ticking clock she hadn't known was inside her body, and as the news spread through the walls of Fairmont Crest like a poisonous whisper, Naomi's strength, the very thing people admired most about her, began to erode under the weight of what she now knew she carried, a mutation that didn't care about her plans, her love, or the life she had carefully built with Jacob. And while she tried to present calm resolve in public, smiling tightly as she reassured friends that she was processing, the truth was that every mirror became an enemy, every family photo a threat, every mention of the future a reminder that the future might not belong to her in the way she always assumed, because BRCA didn't just mean risk, it meant choices she never wanted to make, preventive surgery, fertility fears, survival trade-offs, and worst of all, it meant legacy, because the counselor's voice echoed endlessly in her mind when she said, "There's a 50% chance this could be passed on." And that single statistic detonated the life Naomi thought she was living, especially when Jacob, still reeling from his own unresolved grief, heard those words not as medical information but as a verdict on the one dream he had clung to since losing his brother, having a child, building something unbreakable, creating a future that would finally make sense of all the pain he'd endured. And so when Naomi finally found the courage to tell him the full truth about the mutation, the risks, the doctors gently suggesting caution, the quiet implication that motherhood might now be dangerous or even irresponsible, Jacob's reaction was not anger but devastation, the kind that hollows a man out from the inside, because to him this wasn't just about genes, it was about the sudden possibility that their child might never exist, or worse, might exist only to inherit suffering, and in a moment that would later be replayed in flashbacks and whispered arguments, Jacob said the words that neither of them could take back, the words that sliced through Naomi's already fragile resolve like glass. "I don't know if I can watch our child fight what you're fighting." And though he meant it as fear, it landed as rejection, as if Naomi herself had become a risk, a liability, a broken vessel carrying danger instead of life. And from that moment on, the unspoken tension between them grew louder than any argument they might have had, because Jacob began grieving a child that was still hypothetical while Naomi was grieving the body she thought she could trust. And the cruel irony was that both of them believed they were protecting the other, even as they slowly pulled apart, with Naomi withdrawing into medical appointments and research spirals and late-night internet searches that left her numb and terrified, while Jacob leaned too heavily on distraction, on work, on long drives with no destination, trying to outrun the image of a future that now felt conditional and fragile, and the cracks in their relationship did not go unnoticed, especially by those who had long suspected that Naomi's family history held darker truths than anyone admitted, because as whispers surfaced about who else in Naomi's bloodline may have carried the gene, and who may have died because of it, old secrets clawed their way back into the light, forcing Naomi to confront the possibility that her mother had known more than she ever shared, that silence had been passed down alongside DNA, and that the legacy she feared giving a child might already have shaped her own life in unseen ways. While Jacob, increasingly haunted by the phrase their child, began questioning whether love alone was enough when biology could redraw the rules overnight, leading to a heartbreaking confrontation where Naomi, finally stripped of all pretense, asked him if he saw her or just the risk she carried, and Jacob, choking on his own guilt, admitted that he was terrified of loving something he might lose, terrified of repeating history, terrified that every joy would come with an expiration date. And though neither of them said it out loud, both understood that this wasn't just a health crisis, it was an identity crisis, a reckoning with fate, choice, and the brutal truth that some battles begin long before we know we're fighting them. And as the episode closed on Naomi standing alone in a hospital corridor, hand pressed to her chest as if she could feel the mutation itself pulsing beneath her skin, and Jacob sitting in his car, unable to turn the key, staring at the empty passenger seat where a future once sat so vividly imagined. Beyond the Gates delivered one of its most devastating blows yet, because the real shock wasn't the diagnosis. It was the question left hanging in the air like a curse and a challenge all at once. When love meets inherited danger, who decides what a family is allowed to be, and how much loss can a heart endure before it breaks completely? The fallout doesn't stop there, because in Fairmont Crest nothing stays contained for long, and Naomi's diagnosis becomes the fault line that shifts every relationship around her, beginning with the moment Jacob, desperate for clarity and grasping for something solid, confides in the wrong person at the worst possible time, letting slip the words, BRCA and our future child. In a hushed but overheard conversation that instantly ignites speculation, judgment, and quiet cruelty, and suddenly, Naomi feels eyes on her everywhere, not out of sympathy but out of calculation, as if her worth has been quietly reassessed by a town that smiles politely while tallying risks behind closed doors, and this social pressure only deepens her isolation, especially when well-meaning friends begin offering unsolicited opinions about adoption, surrogacy, and God's plan. Each comment landing like another reminder that her body has become a public debate, while Jacob, meanwhile, spirals into a guilt-ridden attempt to fix what cannot be fixed, researching miracle trials, experimental procedures, and alternative futures late into the night, convincing himself that if he can just find the right answer, the right loophole, the right guarantee, then maybe he won't have to choose between loving Naomi and protecting a child that doesn't yet exist. But his frantic hope only widens the gap between them, because Naomi doesn't want to be saved or solved. She wants to be seen, and the breaking point comes when a routine follow-up appointment reveals another brutal layer to the story. Doctors gently suggesting that time may not be on her side, that decisions about surgery and fertility cannot wait forever, forcing Naomi to confront an impossible timeline where every choice feels like a loss. And when she brings this reality home, raw and shaking, Jacob reacts not with comfort, but with silence. A silence so loud it confirms her deepest fear that he has already begun mourning a version of life she can no longer promise, and in that moment Naomi makes a quiet, devastating decision of her own, choosing to pull back emotionally to protect herself from being slowly abandoned, even as Jacob misreads her distance as resignation, setting the stage for a catastrophic misunderstanding that erupts when the phrase, their child, is spoken again during a heated argument, this time by Naomi herself, her voice breaking as she asks whether that child would ever truly be hers, or if she would always be viewed as the risk factor, the danger, the flawed link in the chain. And Jacob, cornered by his own fear, admits the truth he's been trying not to face, that he's terrified of resenting her, terrified of loving a child while secretly wondering if he doomed them from the start. Words that land with such finality that something between them shatters beyond repair, and as Naomi walks out into the night, tears streaking down her face, viewers are left reeling by the cruel symmetry of it all. Because Naomi is fighting for her life, while Jacob is grieving a future, and neither realizes that the real tragedy may be the silence growing between them, a silence that allows outside forces, meddling relatives, buried family secrets, and an ominous revelation about Naomi's lineage that threatens to rewrite everything she thought she knew, to creep closer, promising that the BRCA diagnosis was never the end of the story, only the opening move in a far more devastating chain of events that will force Fairmont Crest to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't wealth or power, but fear, and sometimes the most crushing blow isn't what we pass down to our children, but what we're too afraid to face together. And still the story keeps tightening its grip, because Naomi's attempt to retreat into solitude only exposes how deeply her life is entangled with everyone else's secrets, and the more she tries to process the diagnosis on her own terms, the more the past refuses to stay buried, beginning with a chilling discovery that emerges from an old medical file her mother never meant her to see. A document tucked away, like a confession that reveals another BRCA-positive relative whose illness was quietly reframed as bad luck to preserve appearances, confirming Naomi's growing suspicion that the women in her family have been conditioned to suffer silently, to carry danger in their bodies while presenting strength to the world, And this realization ignites a rage in Naomi that burns hotter than her fear, because she understands now that she wasn't just given a mutation, she was given a pattern of silence. And when she confronts her mother, the denial cracks under pressure, exposing years of secrecy justified as protection but rooted in shame, a confrontation that leaves Naomi more unmoored than ever, especially when Jacob, reeling from their argument, misinterprets her emotional withdrawal as a sign that she has already chosen a life without him, pushing him toward reckless decisions of his own, including a disastrous conversation with a fertility specialist that frames Naomi's condition in cold, clinical terms, reducing their love story to probabilities and percentages. And when Jacob later repeats those statistics in an argument, thinking facts will steady him, it has the opposite effect, making Naomi feel like an equation instead of a partner, and from that moment on, every interaction between them is laced with grief, guilt, and words unsaid, culminating in a devastating scene where Naomi admits, through tears she's fought to hold back, that she's afraid not just of cancer, but of being remembered as the woman who couldn't give him a child, a confession that finally forces Jacob to confront how deeply his fear has wounded her. Yet even this moment of clarity arrives too late to undo the damage already done, because forces outside their control are moving faster than either of them realizes, including a sudden health scare that lands Naomi back in the hospital, triggering Jacob's worst nightmare and forcing him to face the possibility that he could lose her altogether. A fear so paralyzing it momentarily eclipses every other concern, including the hypothetical child that has haunted him, and as he sits by her bedside, holding her hand and whispering apologies that may never fully heal the scars left behind, viewers are left in agonizing suspense, knowing that even if Naomi survives this scare, the emotional aftermath may prove just as deadly to their relationship, especially as the revelation about her family's genetic history begins to ripple outward, threatening to implicate other characters and unravel long-standing alliances. And as Beyond the Gates closes another chapter on this harrowing arc, the central question becomes impossible to ignore. Can love survive when it's forced to compete with fear, legacy, and the weight of what might be passed down? Or will Naomi and Jacob become another cautionary tale in Fairmont Crest, proof that some truths, once revealed, don't just change the future, they destroy it? Because survival in Fairmont Crest never comes without consequence, Naomi's brief hospitalization becomes the catalyst for a deeper reckoning that neither she nor Jacob can escape, and when test results reveal that the scare was not cancer but a warning, her body signaling vulnerability rather than immediate collapse, the relief is short-lived, almost cruel, because it returns Naomi to the unbearable space of waiting, of living under a shadow that hasn't struck yet but could at any moment. And Jacob, shaken by how close he came to losing her, swears that nothing else matters, that love is enough, that they will face whatever comes together. But even as he says the words, Naomi hears the hesitation beneath them, the fear that still hasn't loosened its grip, and it's that dissonance between what Jacob wants to believe and what he's terrified might be true that keeps reopening the wound. Especially when Naomi learns that Jacob has quietly spoken to his father about the possibility of never having biological children, a conversation meant to prepare but interpreted by Naomi as surrender, confirmation that he's already imagining a future where she is loved but limited, cherished but incomplete, and this realization hits her harder than any diagnosis because it reframes their entire relationship as something provisional, dependent on outcomes neither of them can control. And as Naomi spirals inward, questioning her worth, her femininity, her place in Jacob's life, she begins making decisions without him, scheduling consultations, researching prophylactic surgery, considering options that could permanently alter her body and her future. And when Jacob discovers this, he feels shut out, blindsided, convinced that Naomi no longer trusts him to walk this road beside her, igniting another explosive confrontation where years of unspoken expectations finally erupt. Jacob accusing Naomi of pushing him away, Naomi accusing Jacob of loving an idea of her that never accounted for fragility, and the argument crescendos with the cruelest truth of all, that the phrase, their child, has become a weapon neither of them knows how to disarm, a symbol of everything they're afraid to say out loud, because for Jacob it represents hope and continuity, and for Naomi it represents pressure and potential blame, and when she finally asks him whether he would still choose her if children were definitively off the table, Jacob's silence is not long, but it is long enough to devastate her. Long enough to answer the question he's been avoiding, and in that pause something irreversible happens, because Naomi realizes that even if Jacob stays, she may always feel like she's auditioning for a future she can't guarantee, and so she makes the most heartbreaking choice yet. Not to leave him entirely, but to emotionally armor herself, to stop imagining a shared future that keeps breaking her heart, while Jacob, crushed by the realization that his fear has cost him her trust, begins unraveling in quieter, more dangerous ways, questioning his own capacity for love, haunted by the idea that his desire to protect a child has blinded him to the woman standing right in front of him, and as the town's whispers intensify and Naomi's family secrets continue to surface, implicating other women, other hidden diagnoses, other lives quietly shaped by the same mutation, the story widens beyond just one couple, transforming Naomi's struggle into a generational reckoning that forces Fairmont Crest to confront how deeply it commodifies women's bodies and futures, and as Beyond the Gates drives toward its next devastating turn, the tragedy sharpens into something almost unbearable, because Naomi is learning how to survive in a body she no longer trusts. Jacob is learning that love without courage is just fear in disguise, and the looming question isn't whether they can have a child, but whether they can survive each other once the illusion of certainty is gone, proving once again that in this world, the most brutal spoilers aren't about who lives or dies, but about what love becomes when fate refuses to negotiate. And yet the most devastating turn arrives not in a hospital room or a shouting match, but in the quiet moments that follow, when Naomi begins to notice how differently people speak to her now, how conversations soften around the edges, how optimism is carefully rationed, and how even compliments carry an undertone of pity, because BRCA has rewritten her narrative without her consent. And this realization pushes her into a fierce, almost reckless resolve to reclaim control over something, anything, that still feels like hers, leading her to make a stunning public decision that sends shockwaves through Fairmont Crest, announcing that she will undergo preventative surgery sooner rather than later, a choice framed as empowerment but born out of exhaustion, fear, and the unbearable weight of being treated like a ticking clock. And while some praise her courage, others quietly mourn what they assume she is giving up, including Jacob, who supports her decision in words but struggles in private with the implications, haunted by the idea that every step Naomi takes toward protecting herself feels like another step away from the future he once envisioned, and this internal conflict eats away at him until it manifests in subtle but damaging ways. Missed appointments, emotional distance, moments of frustration he can't quite explain, until Naomi finally confronts him with the truth she's been circling for weeks, that she feels more alone with him than without him, a confession that leaves Jacob shattered, because it forces him to confront the reality that his fear of loss has already caused the very thing he was trying to avoid, and in a cruel twist of fate, it is during this emotional freefall that another revelation detonates, when a relative steps forward with proof that Naomi's genetic legacy is tied to a scandal long buried, a secret affair that means the mutation may not come from the side of the family everyone assumed, throwing Naomi's entire sense of identity into chaos and raising horrifying questions about who else may be affected, who else was kept in the dark, and who else paid the price for silence. And as Naomi grapples with the possibility that her life has been shaped by lies layered atop fear, Jacob finds himself confronting his own reflection in those lies, realizing that he too has been using their child as a shield, a way to avoid sitting with uncertainty, vulnerability, and the terrifying truth that love does not come with guarantees. And when he finally breaks down alone, stripped of bravado, whispering apologies to an empty room, it becomes painfully clear that both of them have been fighting the wrong enemy, because the real antagonist was never BRCA, never genetics, never fate, but the unspoken expectations they allowed to grow between them unchecked, and as the storyline barrels toward its next explosive chapter. With Naomi preparing for surgery, Jacob questioning everything he thought he wanted, and Fairmont Crest buzzing with speculation about whose secrets will surface next, Beyond the Gates delivers a chilling reminder that some diagnoses don't just test the body, they test love itself, forcing characters and viewers alike to ask the most unsettling question of all. When the future stops looking the way you planned, do you cling to what you imagined, or do you finally learn how to choose the person standing in front of you, even if the cost of that choice is letting go of the dream you thought defined you?